As part of the 14-hour broadcast, Yoshi-P took Q&As. The format by which he did this is he threw up a party member on Gaia, and 22 people joined it. Him and it looked like a staff member were in there for camera shot angles, so you could see Yoshi-P's character answering them. And that meant 22. They did this twice, so we got a total of 44 questions. There was one question on E12 that did not get translated due to it being incredibly technical. The translator put a note in there that they themselves had not cleared the raid, so they didn't want to translate it, because I think when you get to something that technical, you don't want to be wrong. And this is somewhere that I'd like to set the expectations around what a Q&A are. Q&As, especially ones like this, where the questions are not pre-screened, they are filled with whatever somebody wants to ask the director of the game. Period. That does not mean that they are well-phrased questions. It does not mean that they are nice, broad questions. And it does not mean that that person has ever seen another one of the interviews or has even watched previous parts of the exact same announcement, much less segment. Some of these questions asked questions that were gone over in the live letter immediately before this. Effectively, I think there was a little bit of a delay there while they did some Heidel and stuff. And there were questions in here asked immediately after somebody in their very same group asked an almost identical question. So I know there can be incredible frustration with that. I would say typically I aim for 10 to 20% of the questions to be something that I'm really directly thrilled that they answered, and then 10 to 20% in addition to that to be something that I'm like, oh, not necessarily my thing, but I'm glad they answered it. And then the remainder I just assume are going to be questions that we've either already got in the past or we knew they weren't going to answer before Yoshi-P even opened his mouth. And if you go in with those kind of expectations, it's a lot easier to view these as an incredible opportunity to get insight into the team. And so let's get started. The first section I'd like to go over, because I've reorganized these to categorize them, is job questions and PvP. These are systems-related questions, and we're going to start off by saying, when will the raid schedule be scheduled? This was gone over in the live letter, that it would be implemented in the traditional method. I've kind of summed up a little bit of some of these answers here. Typically, we would go 2 weeks until normal, 2 weeks until savage, but what they did not do during the live letter is confirm the dates. So he said, please leave your schedules open. This means that obviously with November 23rd being the release date of the expansion, not early access, the official release date, that does put us beginning of December and end of December roughly. But while they revealed all of the seasonal dates, they did not reveal the raid date, and they said they would address those at a later time. There was also a question on, you've worked very hard to balance casters this expansion. What are you thinking about kind of the balance around those? Are there going to be changes to the specialist actions for crafters? Will Reaper be a synergy-based job, which he did say, imagine Xenos being synergy-based. Will there be scholar changes so that it works more like presence of mind or light speed as an equivalent? Will there be jobs that change drastically in how they are played? And will there be changes to the exchange around Shadowbringers PvP using honors? So with all of these, I would say, remember that they did note that they were not going to go over job changes until the September, coming out of that more media tour style event, as well as the October. So all of these point back to polite answers, basically saying, I can't talk about it now, we'll talk about it in a bit. There will be changes to some, but not others. So some abilities may change, some may not, which is a non-answer. We would love to reveal this in September. We cannot answer this for now, but it's something we would like to answer within 6.0, just not right now. We cannot answer this, and while things are changing, we cannot tell you what they are. Please look forward to future live letters. We're actually working on this system, so please be patient. We'll provide updates when they're ready. So all of these are answers where we're kicking it down the road. This is fairly common anytime you ask either a lore-based or a systems-based question that is around something where they've said there is a future event where we plan to address this subject, and then there is a Q&A between that event and that next live letter. It pretty regularly comes up where, like, for example, at FanFest, where Blue Mage was first launched, they said, please do not ask any Blue Mage questions, because we'd love to go over that in more detail tomorrow. And somebody asked a Blue Mage question anyways, and the answer was effectively right in line with these. From here, there was a more specific question saying, hey, with the changes to healers being one barrier, one direct, in Endwalker, will you be moving tanks to being dedicated main tanks and off tanks? And the answer was no. Will the downscaling affect all forms of Deep Dungeon? Downscaling has been an incredible topic of discussion, especially for people who have never lived through any game that has been affected by something that has gone back and rescaled previous content. And he said, yeah, of course, but as mentioned before, you'll have to wonder to what extent, and then he just kind of mumbled off. Around the PvP changes of last year, we have provided a lot of feedback and haven't really heard much. Halfway through his response, they were asked a follow-up question about some more adjustments, so his question kind of gets a little disjointed here. And so he says, I would sincerely like to apologize for the lack of updates on the matter, but rest assured that when it comes to PvP and matches adjustment, whenever there's feedback coming in, we'll definitely bring it up to the team for discussions. Truthfully speaking, we are still observing the situation and doing minor adjustments, but due to various developments ongoing right now, we're going to bring forward the adjustments to Endwalker, but rest assured that we do read your feedbacks, so please look forward to our updates in the future. So a little bit more than a non-answer, but very much like, hey, obviously, kind of like the Aggie Glamour question that was asked in Mr. Happy's Yoshi-P interview. I can't tell you right now, but I want you to know that I'm listening. Now, this is something that I almost categorized under personal questions, but I thought revealed some system changes in kind of how they think about it. And it was when gearing out your Black Mage, what do you focus on first, directed directly at Yoshi-P? I tend to focus on spell speed. Keep in mind in the past he has said that he uses websites like Salted XIV. He did not name that one particular, but he did name that they were Western websites to chase down kind of his best in slot. So when it comes to progressing Savage raids, I tend to start adjusting my casting timeline based on my current item level, since Black Mages are purely damage based. So the higher I can cast, the more damage I can stack and thus contribute to my party through damage. However, it also depends on the raid tier. Like, for example, during 5.0, when it comes to its effect, stacking spell speed will become the most important factor, but as the tier goes up, the spell speed effect will diminish. So I tend to switch to crit-based equipments in order to take advantage of this effect. When it comes to the order of equipments, I tend to start from crafted equipments first. Then, like most players, I start to focus on left side equipments like body, leg, weapon, and slowly go from there. With belts not being usable in the future, I can see players will have a hard time understanding how much the numbers will change, so likely the next live letter will have a demonstration on that part, though I don't see much changing. I think that was more informative than anything else we'd gotten so far in this section. Obviously, you can see I'm doing these out of order. So I'm building towards the better ones in there. And these last two are both damage dummy based, both aimed, in my opinion, at the portion of the community that right now feels that they would love to see more clarity from communication from Square Enix on how they feel about our goals to improve at how we play the game. A huge portion of the community right now uses damage meters as an in-game tool to seek self-improvement. They can then upload those to FF logs to compare to other players, and then take those logs and move them over to XIV analysis to see exactly where they're not improving, because in-game we have Stone Sky Sea Air, we have target dummies, and then we have duty complete as you just did it. The role quests don't really offer a challenge. There isn't really a lot of easy ways to kind of get better at your job once you have the base rotation down and you've read your tooltips. It's really hard in-game to get very clear feedback on how to get better. So on that note, I'm a dancer main, and it's very hard to gauge a spirit, so I can't really practice my rotation effectively on dummies. May I know if we can have a dummy that will allow me to have a party-based dummy mode? Okay, so the question here really is, can we have 4 and 8-man party-based combat? In my mind, that would be a great opportunity to move into instance-based things such as harder role, like Savage-based role quests, where you could get feedback from the game on getting better at playing specifically your role with the toolkit available. Also, just what happens when I have multiple people that are on the allied side and multiple targets? How do I get some feedback there without using third-party tools, which of course are technically considered a breach of terms of service? And Yoshi-P's response was, well, it's not impossible. I doubt we can properly measure the number correctly, and I'm afraid it would break the calculations required here. Not an 8-man dummy raid, but a dummy where you would place the dummy through exploration in dungeons or raids, and then practice your rotation there. Would that be okay? Let us think deeper on that first. And so effectively, this is the first time in my mind that they've said exploration mode could be moving to being a more full-featured tool beyond just cosmetics. When we look at the previous version of things prior to exploration mode, it was a duty recorder that was kind of partially supported, but never really became the full-featured thing that exploration mode has become. And so the idea that exploration mode could go from being screenshots and a chance to explore, the idea that we could go to placing a dummy in there, and we could go to maybe spawning mobs and resetting them and protecting I'm not necessarily going into other people's players' time. In my own time, I'm in exploration mode, and I'm messing with the boss at my own speed as a chance to kind of practice this. As a follow-up to this question, we had, can we sink our dummy down to level 70? I'd like to practice for ultimate. I would like to make it clear you can have a level 70 dummy in front of your house, but unfortunately, there are jobs in this game where in order to keep button bloat down, we have abilities that are added to the game as traits, and so they modify previous versions of your rotation. And what that ultimately means is that until you sink down into content, you have the most up-to-date kit available to you, and it's really hard to strip down to truly what the kit was. And so when you choose to go take on things like minimum item level or ultimate, where the goal is to go back and be very good at the game at a previous snapshot in time, it is very hard to go practice your rotation in the same way, especially for jobs that have seen massive, massive changes from one expansion to the next. And so it takes Yoshi-P a second to kind of picture this, and he goes, I see. So you mean that you can't use level 80 skills on level 70 ultimate content. I mean, that's true. Whenever we release new expansions, that our rotations will sometimes will change drastically. It's not impossible, but I'd need to bring in Yokozawa for this discussion. First, let me look into this. This is an answer that says, hey, you have brought something forward to them that has had them, oh my gosh, that is a very true and valid criticism. This is a reminder that criticism in this game is welcome. The devs take this incredibly positively, and a game does not have to be perfect for us to love it. This is somebody who clearly says, hey, I like this game. I'd like to like this game even more. I'd like to get better at this game, and I'd like it if you would help me do that. And Yoshi-P says, that's a very valid point. I really could be doing better at that. My team really could be doing better at that. Let me help you. And so this is a great reminder why bringing up criticisms, why bringing up areas is an area that we should feel comfortable with as a community, because it's how they get better. Shadowbringers is as good as it was because it's been a dialogue between us, the players, and the devs, where when we've had an issue with how something was handled, or we wish it was handled in a better way, or we can even think of a way where they could improve, through feedback like this, every once in a while a question gets through, and we see a drastic quality of life improvement as a direct result. Now, the next category here is technical questions. Technical questions usually are slowly revealing more and more of the picture of the things they can and cannot do as a direct result of the fact that they are operating on very old code. The first one here, in housing upstairs and downstairs, the lights are tied together. Can we do them separately? He says, well, I mean, lighting is currently being done that way. Well, since it's a limited space, it's not that we can't do that. It's not that we can't, but it does pose some difficulty here that we'd have to try first. And so that's effectively somewhere that he never thought about it being used in that way. I know that downstairs, I love the light that the aquariums give off, so I turn the lights down. And what that means is upstairs in my house, it's dim as well, because I don't have that choice. I got to set one level of light for the entire house, and that was my option. The next question here, none of the questions here were really aimed to be technical. I grabbed them and manually moved them into this category in my mind because of the answer we got. So the next question is, for ninjas, could we have asymmetric gearing? Basically the ability to have a primary weapon and an offhand that look different, the way Paladin, sword, and shield, the way Crafters, primary and offhand, the way Fisher with their gig. But we get incredibly detailed weapons with Dancer and with Ninja, and I think Monk as well. And so, sometime after the game's initial launch, we added stuff like this. Ninja was added later. And so now we have to start to ask, okay, but I don't have that much control. You just make me carry two of the same weapon. And this is why this is in the technical section. For dual-wielding classes, it saves memory to duplicate the weapon. If they changed this, we would see a drop in cosmetic quality. So he did have a longer answer here. I summed this up, but it effectively said, it's not that I'm telling you no. It's that I'm reminding you that if we made a change like this, there would be a cost. And so that's why we haven't done that to this point, which most of the technical question here is going to be a reminder of. That nothing is, it's not about there was a good option and a bad option on the table in the meeting, and we all voted and chose the bad option. It's that every option had pros and cons, and through a series of decisions over years and multiple expansions, we've ended up where we are. And some things are a result of a good decision made before that didn't have the foresight to be able to see how that decision would affect the future. So sometimes they get hamstrung by something that they didn't intend to be that way. Housing is a huge system that is affected by this. Why can't squadrons do all old dungeons? Why do they skip some? Remember that Squadrons was the precursor to Trusts. They have not gone back and really done anything with this, and I don't think ever will now that we have Trusts. And so, of course, that's where the question centers. This is because the implementation of Squadrons and Trusts are drastically different due to how it was established before we could develop Trusts. So, due to its programming nature, there are some dungeons that if we use the Squadron-type programming, they won't be able to clear them. So, we have to skip some of them. But for Trusts, we have to program so that the dungeons we release can be cleared by them, so we have to change the programming method to ensure Trust members can clear them, like how they deal with all the mechanics that were thrown at them. So put in short, due to the difference in programming how Squadrons came before Trusts, there is a gap in how both of these could work. What this really means is that when they design a mechanic that's new in Endwalker, they would have to then teach the Trusts how to handle that mechanic. It doesn't mean they won't add that mechanic. It just means that that's another layer in making those dungeons that old dungeons would not have had. One of the things Brian and I asked after the announcements of Squadrons at the last media tour of Trusts was will these be able to be backwards compatible? Will these be able to be used in the open world? The two places that really we see content struggle when it ages and somebody wants to go through it for the first time, or somebody's uncomfortable around other players. Another follow-up question is, can they be mix and match, where I would have two Trusts and me and a friend in a light party? Are there options? What's the flexibility within this system? And effectively, the answers around our questions and questions like them have been, even Trusts were not necessarily built with that in mind. They don't have any intention long-term of bringing in Trusts as crossover type events where we would have somebody come in. I picture somebody off the wall like Mario coming in and running dungeons with us, because the Trusts are meant to also act as a narrative expansion to the game where they talk to each other and they reveal unique things. If you run Matoya's Relict with Trust, for example, you actually learn some historic information around Y'shtola, and that would not have been revealed otherwise. And so if you want to go know what that is, that's stuff from before that was revealed through the interactions of the Trusts in that dungeon. And so they have to be able to program not only how they play, but also how they talk to each other. And that's why they're really on rails, kind of like a ride at Disney. So they're really not something that could ever function in the open world, and to put them in old dungeons would require a huge amount of work. For me personally, the two dungeons I think would be worth the work would be Castrum and Praetorium, so that when new players get to MSQ for the first time, MSQ Roulette is not a reflection of the content as it is now, because running it the way the community runs it frustrates both the community and many new players. It's not really set up to be an optimal experience. I think MSQ Roulette has a lot of friction-causing elements, and Trust would be so good at telling the story and the narrative and the pacing that those two dungeons in particular are meant to do. I've been enjoying Doman Mahjong lately. Will there be a three-man Mahjong option? These next two questions are going to be about Mahjong, but they are going to actually offer us insight into how all side content is supported. We are contemplating on this, but no further plans yet. Do note that the algorithm for three-man Mahjong is very different, so there will be cost needed to make it work there. This is something we have to be careful when working on. The follow-up question here is, I've been enjoying Mahjong a lot. Is there a way for us players to set up Mahjong tables in our house or play Mahjong in a light party format? Like the three-man Mahjong idea and all, we did indeed lay those ideas on the table, and it would be 6.0 and beyond. That does not mean confirmation of 6.0, by the way. When they phrase it like that, they just mean we're talking at least an expansion or more in the future. We do want to do it, but you would have to wait for it to happen. Once again, they do not get to everything they want to do. That does not mean it is coming. There are plenty of things they've said they want to do over the years that we never get. So this effectively says when we add content and we make it one way, it's not always easy to pivot it into another way of being used. So when we introduce a new piece of side content to the game, like the upcoming Island Sanctuary content, it will be built with an original vision in mind, and the flexibility will only be as flexible as they saw on the front end. Ishgard Restoration, for example, was implemented into the game to be doable data center wide, and yet immediately after player feedback that wanted it to be more worldwide, where you could not go complete events and take part in events on other servers, they actually hotfixed that change without even taking servers down, which show us when they're more aware of there is a version A of how this could roll out and version B, they can implement those changes, but only when they see them coming. And so the older content is, or the more different we want it to be done outside of how it's first implemented, that's what decreases the likelihood that we ever get an update to that piece of side content. So we've got some glamour dresser questions. There's always glamour dresser questions of some kind. None of them are about more glamour plates or more size in the glamour. These are much more systems based. The glamour feature feels a bit not user-friendly due to how hard obtaining dyes and how I can apply the dyes to my glamour dresser. Will there be an update on the glamour dresser to address the clunkiness? This is where criticism and feedback is received so well by this team. Yoshi-P says, yeah, the glamour dresser is a feature implemented much later in the game. We'd have to look into this. But note that the translator did say that this was Yoshi-P agreeing that the feature is a bit unfriendly, that came across in that tone there. Obviously, I can't understand Japanese to try to elaborate any further than we get. Thank goodness for the Reddit Final Fantasy XIV translation community. I really do appreciate it. It makes life so much better for those of us that love this game and then would not be able to get any non-live translated event. As the follow-up question goes, there are a lot of equipment in this game. There is a lot of equipment in this game, but it feels like such a waste that it's either we use them to glamour or we don't. Is there another way for these equipments to be utilized, such as a glamour catalog? By the way, my glamour dresser is almost full. Now Yoshi-P said, oof. They're bringing back the old idea of the glamour log and not. They wanted to do so. They even had the text and everything ready to go. They cannot include all of them because it's too full and the save data cannot handle it. If we can somehow make it recorded, it'd be nice, but we're definitely out of space to save such data. We want to realize it one day. Sorry. And so effectively what we get here is a reminder that the glamour system was not implemented in a way that was meant to turn into what it is. And as a result, it's not as simple as undoing that. They would need to build a new system to house this, to work more like the orchestron log, where you have this ability to see what you have and what you don't. Our glamour dressers, those are your items. My pig suit stored in my glamour dresser, dyed blue, even though it's dyed different colors on the glamour plates, is still in there with my original metallic blue dye, my original pig suit. It is mine. It does not need to be because every other pig suit is identical to it. And so, because they built it that way, there's no way to make it easy to go back and say, do you have pig suit? Yes or no. Instead, they say, do we have storage for your specific pig suit, which is much, much, much more expensive. Speaking of growth, especially around a time that during, earlier this morning, it was announced that there were no, the complete edition of Final Fantasy XIV to get players from the free trial through Shadowbringers prior to Endwalker is no longer available to be bought digitally at this exact time because of growth. We have a huge amount of growth in this community right now. They literally cannot accept more players to go through that transition right now, so they just halted code sales. Around that same thing, will there be more friend slots implemented in the future? Yoshi-P responded by saying, well, there's only about 7% of the player base. I take that as active player base, not the 23 million that have ever played the game. fully filled with the 200 friend slots available, but we do acknowledge it's a commonly requested feature, so we need to look into the latest data. We'll look into it. I would love to see this further extended to also include what happens with link shells, cross-world link shells. Are we soon going to get cross-data center link shells? Are there talks about the changes to the way free companies work and things like that? In general, I'd love to see the ability for all of the social features, and that in the past has included questions about people who have maxed out their blacklist, move to something that's more sustainably scalable as this game becomes absolutely massive. This next section here is glamour. Glamour is always brought up. Cosmetics are always brought up at these events. Usually, these questions center around very, very, very specific requests that put Yoshi-P in a position where he may not be aware of that specific item, he may not be aware of whether or not that specific thing had a reason for why it was done that way, and the person is only asking about the specific item they want, rather than how things should be handled in that entire category of items, and then listing the item they want as an example. And as a result, a lot of these answers are going to be very, very short and to the point. The Chocobo mask, can it be dyeable? He said, I'll ask. Will we see an implementation of housing items such as the ones in Azim's Step? This is not a, specifically naming Azim's Step. This is not an issue. We'll look into it. Can we get a Feoul minion or more support for pixies? No plans on it, but if they were, they wouldn't be tied to Shadowbringers. We would update you if there was a lot of interest. We can look. That if a lot of the interest is a pretty common theme around these. Could we get a Shadow... we want the Shadowbringers Urianger as a minion. Well, it depends on which costume, but probably. Is it possible to implement Truthseeker, Y'shtola's weapon, from Heavensward into the game for us players to use? As long as players are willing to pay, we'll do so. Maybe in the future. Is it possible to create a skinny Rothgar? Nope. And due to packet communication and increased other technical issues, to be able to freely adjust body shapes while maintaining the image of the race would be really hard to implement. For Aura, their earrings usually are located inside their horns, so it's hard to us enjoy due to how they wear it. Will there be adjustments? No plans. What's the name of the song played where everybody gathered during the final segment of patch 5.3? Well, you'd have to pinpoint the exact location, which scene it was, and I'd have to let you know, but we don't name the songs. Trying to ask us the name of the song, not even Soken knows. The song names are actually decided by Oda and Koji when the song is scheduled to be released on a soundtrack, so we refer to them by code name. Will we be able to switch on and off the display of sleeves on our equipment? On and off sleeves? I don't think that'd be popular. Will there be hand equipment where we can force long sleeves to make it half sleeves in Endwalker for tanks? Due to various specifications on how we create each equipment to allow mix and match, we didn't specifically create the equipment to allow that much customization, but we appreciate you can send the requests to our character team instead. They can look into this. So all these questions so far have been centered on, are we going to get updates to the character creator? Are there going to be updates to the way gear displays on said characters? Will we get specific changes or updates to specific aspects of basically mounts, minions, and glamour? So that's very, very specific questions. Fairly common for the way that this is usually asked. Will there be hand equipment for tanks? And can you allow weathered equipments to be taken off to allow us to change dyes for Shadowbringer weapons? I mean, I got the same question in the past. It'd be faster to just to discard the weathered equipment and make it dyeable at the start. But since I haven't ironed out the details yet, I would have to wait. I'd need to discuss it with the team. Will Dancer and Gunbreaker receive the Cactar weapons from the Golden Saucer? For now, no. But we can relay the request to the team. Due to the great amount of resources implemented in the future, it wouldn't be now, it'd be in the future. This question actually opens up a much bigger question about how do new jobs get supported for past content. Something like Palace of the Dead, where the weapon is actually required to be displayed while they're inside the content, requires that all new jobs get Palace of the Dead weapons. But should every dungeon below level 70 get Reaper and Sage loot added to it? should every cosmetic set, such as things in the Golden Saucer, go get support? On one hand, that would be really great to bring those jobs all the way up to the same level of detail and love that our existing jobs have for the people that main those jobs. On the other hand, it becomes increasingly expensive to consider adding a job if you have to do multiple expansions of backwards compatibility updates prior to implementing them in the game. So for me personally, that starts to beg the question of, at what point does this game start to drop to just one job per expansion because it's simply too expensive to add? You have to remember, at this point going into next expansion, we will now have 19 jobs of weapons that have to get added to every time we want a new set of trial weapons or relic weapons. Soon that'll be 22, 35, 82, whatever number they let this build to. At what point does that become a problem? I want to be able to take screenshots from Dunscath, so will exploration mode be available for Dunscath? Exploration mode in general has been expanded on drastically, but the question here is, will we expand it to other types of content as well, namely things like alliance raids? Where's the exploration mode going? He said, we did do a testing, but the debug cost is kind of high, so not for now, but since it's something the devs want to see, we can likely make it happen in the future. Will there be a release of Lisa's costume from Stormblood, as well as additional Viera hairstyles? Keep in mind that's really loose on Viera hairstyles, and they literally just went over the fact that there would be new additional Viera hairstyles available, and they were sorry it took so long in the live letter prior to this. And so he says, as seen today, you saw additional hairstyles on Viera, so yes, there will be. In the future, in order to ensure we can easily add more hairstyles to both Viera and Hrothgar — Hrothgar was not addressed during the live letter — we will actually change the specification on them right now, so it's underway. It will take some time for that to happen, so please be patient. As for the demand on Derplander's stubble, right, our lovely character in all of our trailers, that was in high demand, and we were actually experimenting on different methods of implementation right now. It's quite a, I don't know what the translation quite is here, but we are indeed testing out impactful. We are indeed testing out various methods right now, so please stay tuned for further updates. As for Lisa's costume, because it's a different specification, we felt her costume was not properly tuned for combat, so the character team would need to adjust them before we can think about whether or not to release them. He went on to explain how rigging and all of that works. You have to picture that whatever jobs are able to equip whatever equipment is added to the game from a glamour perspective, that equipment now has to function within every animation that character is capable of, both in combat and things like emotes. It's a massive difference as opposed to them designing something for a particular NPC that has a finite number of things. It will never be adjusted. That character will never be taller, never have any sliders adjusted on it, no different aspects of it. And so it is not as simple as they already have the content in game. It's much more expensive than that. So will the Pagaga emote be implemented in the future? There's actually a clip of this playing on YouTube from, I believe it's in Zadnor's, where you guys said at the end of one of the fates. And they said that one is indeed cute. I think it would be implemented. The one who works on the emotes would be happy, but will not state whether or not it's purchasable because we haven't confirmed that yet. Once there's details, we'll let you know. They could tie that behind a future relic grind or anything like that, so not a big deal. Is it possible to apply flipped emotes to all emotes like the Go-Go Posing Ranger one? Not impossible, but it would require implementation of the existing ones as a separate set, except flipped, not like an evil version, the same ones, because of how our current emotes are implemented here. So this is something we'd have to think about beforehand, and this is the sort of thing where if they'd planned that early on, right? Do emotes get to take on additional colors? If there's something like that, can they be done in different ways? If it wasn't designed like that at the beginning, that's rough. As for the Derplander comment, this is what I got from the live translator, so I don't know if they're referring to him that way or what he referred to it as, because I'm getting it after it's gone through a little bit of a game of telephone. You mentioned that Viera and Hrothgar may be, I think may is a very generous word here, the final race implemented to the game, but were there any other race candidates aside from the Viera and Hrothgar that ultimately did not make it into the cut? Since there were plans for Viera and Hrothgar, the ones that were considered for next race implementation would be adding male and female, right? Ungender locking them. We got a lot of requests on that, so we did our best to have it in. As for other candidates, we're probably satisfied with having this many in the name, so we didn't think about it much. It's a bit niche, but maybe Lizardman, I guess, during the ones shown before our first expansion. That really shocked me. I mean, it would have taken such a high cost to implement them, so I don't think we want to think about more races. Will there be a shadow... This is the best question in this category. Will there be Shadowbringers NPC costumes be available for Mog Station? For now, we don't have plans on that when it comes to requests. We did plan on Ringing, so if there's a release in the future, Ringing would come first. Oh, and Gaia. If there's Gaia, she'd be in there too, but it'll take some cost for that to happen. Wait, you want Chai? I want to ask that if we're going to release Chai costumes in the future, will it come with being fat as well? I really can't imagine you being a monk while glamoring as Chais, but I do admit the husband and wife are such great characters. This is a really good question because it gives him the opportunity to share what the sorts of costumes he does want to get in-game are, instead of you asking for specific ones by name. This actually started to hint, do they think about other ones? Even if we never get them, do they think about other ones? Do those excite them? What would it take for those to get in-game? This and the rigging that he went on about earlier are actually what inform us what drives all glamour decisions, not just the ones that we specifically want. At this point, we moved into kind of his personal questions, things that target Yoshi-P specifically. Do you have any food that you're hooked on recently? Nothing in particular. But if you want, there's something interesting, probably vegetables. I mean, I've recently been so busy that eating schedule is often very screwed up, and I don't have an appetite for meat and such because it's too heavy, so I went light recently like a rabbit. I know you're busy here and all, but have you been sleeping well? That depends on your definition of well and proper, but thank you for your concern. I'm on shorter sleep. I sleep about 5 hours a day. I do indeed catch up on sleeping, but I get people all the time that tell me I should sleep more or that age is going to catch up with me. But I have to tell you that I don't sleep long. I actually feel useless, and my body will tell me that I cannot sleep long. I cannot sleep for too long doing nothing. Not a heavy sleeper to begin with. Let's say you're going independent in the future. No longer as Square Enix staff. What game will you be making from scratch? The entire first half of this question, there is no way in a live format in-game he could address this. And now he has to take this on in a diplomatic way, just like if somebody asked you at your job what you would look forward to when you're no longer at that job. I don't think it's intended that way, but just think about like context. Because the first half of this is, I'll say this. Right, so he's gotta say, like, to my bosses that are watching this live, I do not have enough financial capacity as an individual to create a game from scratch. While I have the knowledge to create one, right, I'd like to keep my job. In order to create a game where everybody in the world can enjoy is definitely out of my capacity. But if some oil baron or somebody who's really infinite influence and money, I can definitely think of one. But it would depend on time and situation climate as well. Right? So that's a really nice way of saying, Square Enix can't publish everything I want to make. You have to think about the situation and climate, and things do cost time and resources. I'm qualified at my job, but I appreciate them for supporting me in all of the areas outside of my job. I don't have the ability to do what I can without them. That is how I read this. I read this entirely as I do not want to come across wrong, right? I don't want to out of context seem like I'm bashing the company that I work for that's given me a pretty incredible career. So, if it's a game where it can be completed in one city, where various games and contexts can be contained under one city, I mean, creating an overworld scale game is really hard. I'd like to discuss this another time. He typically doesn't like to answer non-14 questions at 14 specific events. But if it's a game that's at medieval level, small scale, where every detail is compressed into one city worth, if it's dark fantasy, yeah, I'd like to make a game like that. Now, the reason I took so long answering this one and kind of going over his response is because I want to note that Yoshi-P has been working on Final Fantasy XVI in some capacity from initial all the way up to trailer as far back as Heavensward, We just recently became aware of it. We still know very, very little about it. But if you go back and with that knowledge, reread every Q&A that he's taken that is still documented, since then, there have been a ton of times where he said, I don't know. It'd be kind of cool to make a mainline numbered Final Fantasy game that tackled M-rated subjects under an M rating. And then Final Fantasy XVI comes out and is said it will chase an M rating. So there are times that reading into this does tell you the sort of titles that he might already be working on, or in the future would one day like to work on. He has mentioned things like Diablo in this context. He has mentioned other MMOs. He has mentioned other narrative explorations. Immense respect for a number of games out there that aren't necessarily the ones he said he wants to work on. So just be aware that when he answers questions like this is a good thing to store in the back of your brain in case one day you see them starting to hint that there might be a game that is dark fantasy centered on one city where we're going to deeply explore that one city and we can complete the entire game and all of its systems in that one city, and wonder, is that the sort of thing in a medieval type location where Yoshi-P is involved, because this is the insight into that, if Final Fantasy XVI isn't the game he's talking about right now. And last up, please tell us what brand of cigarettes do you smoke? And he says Cabin Mile, Lark, Lucky Strike, Camel, and many more. Some brands no longer exist. Way to not pick one. And so that is the end of 43 questions. Obviously, that was an immensely long interview type format for him to answer. He did make a comment on how doing it live and in-game was much easier compared to the Digital Fan Fest one, due to people being reluctant to show their faces and privacy issues, etc. And then also at some point it was stated, the translator caught, that there would be character costume glamour as reward for 6.0 fates. Was not assigned to any one question. I think the bicolor gemstone was a pretty good way to start introducing really cool fate rewards. We also had character costume glamour for like the frog suit and all that. So I don't know that that's new. I think that's just a continuation of an idea. But this was a lot. It was probably the single largest Q&A we've seen. So as a result, when you end up with questions where the answer is no, 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 you also end up with an immense amount of information here and an immense amount of context, especially coming off a live letter where he summed up effectively a year of expansion coverage while revealing some new things at the earlier live letter. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Enjoy looking forward to Q&As. There will be a lot of interviews coming up in the future months, especially around the media tour and the big media blitz as he goes around and tries to interact with as many people as he can find time for, to share his excitement for Endwalker and share what people want to know way beyond what they can get to in the live letters that are coming up. So it's just the nature of this. I will remind you that this was asked by the Gaia server, so these are not necessarily representative of the entire player population. So that's why there's not specifically going to be questions about anything relating to the way things have been handled on Twitch recently with all these new WoW players coming in, or the Fat Black Chocobo event. This is why there's not going to be anything around any specific drama with, you know, any one particular content creator or any one particular community, or any one particular thing such as add-ons. This is an in-game held event on the Gaia server where he took 44 individuals into Circus Tower to ask them questions in that format. And so as a result, that has a huge skew on the types of questions you're going to get answered. That also does not mean that those people were able to watch the event live. Maybe they didn't get to catch the entire live letter. Maybe they've never seen an interview with him before. There are a lot of new players coming in the game. So when we see future Q&A formats in the future, while it does make me sigh out loud when it's a question we've had asked a million times that I already know the answer is going to be a polite, no, I'll ask, I'll get back to you later, maybe, possibly, if there's interest. It is going to be a whole new round of all of these new and wonderful shiny new Sprout faces coming in and wanting to know things that we already know they aren't going to address. And so don't be shocked if with future Q&As we do have a number of these questions that are simply non-answers in what's given, especially when it's things like, can you tell me what's going to happen in the story next patch? And they're like, no, I can't. But I hope you enjoy playing our game, and I hope you don't mind that we're going to try to stick to topics that are just around the entire game. Kinda.